vollständigen Namen.
Von Jeffrey Edward Epstein und meine Wohnadresse ist 6100 Red Hook Boulevard auf den Jungferninseln.
Wurden Sie jemals wegen eines Verbrechens verurteilt?
Die Sexualverbrechen des millionenschweren
Work with them, yes.
A few months ago, you had in your office here Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador. You were shaking hands with him over a trade deal. He's today been forced to resign from the House of Lords, the upper house of the British Parliament, over his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Just wondered if you had any reaction to that, since obviously he was...
I didn't know about it.
Okay, so I have been staring at my screen for the better part of, 96 hours now, and I still feel like I'm trying to read a map in the dark. It has been a deeply confusing, just an overwhelming week. I've got the timeline, I've got the headlines, but I'm looking at this mountain of documents, 3.5 million pages, and I feel like I'm just missing the forest for the trees.
Right.
We have the Epstein Files Transparency Act finally kicking in. We've got this huge data dump. But is this actually justice, or is it just noise?
It is noise by design. That's, I think, the very first thing we have to understand.
And by design.
Absolutely. If you release 3.5 million pages of raw data, you aren't clarifying things. You're burying them.
So it's a flood.
It's a flood. And what we have here isn't some neat narrative. It's a crime scene. And like any crime scene that's been left to rot for years, the evidence is, it's contaminated.
Contaminated how? Because the headline everyone is running with, the one I'm seeing on every single news kicker, is transparency. The files are out. But you're suggesting the release itself is actually part of the problem.
Look at the mechanics of it. This release follows a massive political tug-of-war throughout 2025. It wasn't a clean process.
No.
You had Attorney General Pam Bondi sitting on this for months, claiming it was on her desk. Then you had FBI Director Kash Patel promising absolute transparency.
I remember that.
But what actually dropped on January 30th wasn't a curated report. It wasn't an investigation. It was a chaotic, disorganized avalanche. And right there, in that chaos, we see the first major failure, the protection of the innocent versus the protection of the guilty.
You talk about the redaction errors. I saw the reports, about the Bloom firm being furious, but I wasn't sure if that was just legal posturing or...
Furious is an understatement. I mean, try to imagine you are a survivor.
Okay.
You were trafficked from, say, Uzbekistan. You fought for anonymity for years. You're trying to rebuild a life. And then the Department of Justice, the very institution that's supposed to protect you, uploads a file where your name appears, completely unredacted, 538 times.
Wait, 538 times? That's not a typo. That's the real number.
That is a statistic from the files.
Yeah.
That is a human being's identity, their life, exposed over and over and over.
Oh, God.
Meanwhile, you scroll down in that same document, and the name of a billionaire potential witness is buried under a thick black bar.
So the victim is named, the powerful person is hidden.
Precisely. So our mission today isn't just to, gossip about who was at the parties.
Right.
We need to look at the system that allows a victim to be exposed while a potential perpetrator is shielded. We're going to look at the intelligence angles, the financial weirdness, and the psychology of Epstein himself that these documents reveal.
So we're moving past the who and we're looking at the how, because clearly just knowing a listing names hasn't fixed anything.
Exactly. We need to understand the machinery of impunity. That's the goal here.
Okay, so let's start there. Part one, the release and the political battle. Because the sheer volume of this dump is, like you said, part of the story, isn't it? You mentioned 3.5 million pages. That sounds like everything.
It sounds like everything, but it's deceptively incomplete. 3.5 million pages is a staggering amount of data to sift through, absolutely. But here's the catch, and this is crucial for you to understand.
Okay.
Nearly as many pages remain unreleased. We are looking at estimates of another 2.5 to 3 million pages that are still sealed.
So we're only looking at half the picture. Maybe a little more than half.
At best. Correct. And that is why you have figures like Representative Rokana, who, he was a co-sponsor of the Transparency Act.
He pushed for this.
He pushed for it, and now he's coming out and saying this release is not good enough. He actually used a very specific legal phrase. He said it shocks the conscience.
Shocks the conscience. That sounds weighty, but does it actually mean anything legally, or is he just being, dramatic for the cameras?
No, it's a term of art in constitutional law. It has real weight. Something shocks the conscience when it is so unjust, so fundamentally egregious that it violates the basic principles of due process. Khanna isn't just tweeting his frustration. He's signaling that the government's handling of this dumping data that exposes victims while hiding half the truth is a profound violation of the public trust.
And getting to this point, getting even this sort of flawed release was a nightmare in itself. I want to talk about that political blame game that happened over the last year, because it really sets the context for why people are so skeptical right now.
It's a classic case of shifting narratives, isn't it?
Completely.
If you rewind to early 2025, you had Attorney General Pam Bondi essentially claiming the list was imminent. She made it sound like she was personally reviewing it, per directive from President Trump. She said it was on her desk.
And then crickets.
And then nothing of substance was released for months. It just became this dangling carrot. It's coming, it's coming.
And then you have FBI Director Kash Patel. His rhetoric was colorful, to say the least.
Right. His stance has been incredibly fluid. He started out promising absolute transparency. He's on record saying he wanted to see, and pardon the language, but this is a direct quote, who pedoed around with Epstein.
That was his phrasing, yeah.
He positioned himself as the guy who was going to kick down the doors and expose everyone.
But then what happened? He completely changed his tune.
He did. Later, he testifies before Congress that there was no credible information that Epstein trafficked girls to anyone else.
Which seems, how is that possible, given what we know just from public reporting, let alone secret files? The idea that Epstein was trafficking girls to no one, it contradicts the entire business model.
It contradicts the very nature of a trafficking operation. You don't build a global logistics network for one consumer. It's absurd on its face. And this pivot by Patel fed directly into this deep state narrative that was building.
Right.
You had these major political figures, Donald Trump Jr., Elon Musk, who spent months framing the release as a political weapon. The idea was that the files would come out and just decimate their opponents.
Right. The narrative was, just wait until the files come out, the other side is going down. It was treated like an election strategy.
Exactly. But now that a chunk of the files are actually out, the reality is much, much messier. It implicates figures across the entire political spectrum. It's not a partisan weapon. It's a systemic indictment.
And when it didn't turn out to be a clean hit job on one side,
the enthusiasm for transparency suddenly evaporated in certain circles. Funny how that works.
And speaking of indictments, or the lack thereof, we have to go back to that redaction disaster, because this is where the incompetence argument really holds water. You mentioned survivors being exposed. Was this just a glitch, bad software, or something more?
It really raises the question of whether this was incompetence, just a rushed, sloppy job, or if it reflects a deeper systemic apathy toward the victims when compared to the VIPs.
A hierarchy of protection.
That's a good way to put it. Lawyers for the survivors, specifically the Bloom firm, have been incredibly vocal about this. We mentioned the woman from Uzbekistan. Her name appearing 538 times unredacted isn't a glitch. That's a systemic failure of review. That means multiple people saw it, or no one bothered to look. I don't know which is worse.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? The DOJ claims its whole purpose is to protect victims, yet this release has actively re-traumatized them while simultaneously protecting the powerful enablers.
It is. It's like the system is designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, even when it's trying to pretend otherwise.
It reinforces the hierarchy.
It lays it bare.
Yeah.
If you are a billionaire, you get a black bar over your name. If you are a trafficking victim, you get exposed to the entire internet. That tells you everything you need to know about who the system is actually working for.
Well, let's talk about those billionaires. Let's move to part 2 of our dive, the high-profile names. And we have to start with the big one, the one that's been generating the most headlines in the last few days, Donald Trump.
The data here is overwhelming in volume, even if it's not always a smoking gun of criminality.
What do you mean?
The files contain over 38,000 references to Trump, Melania, or Mar-a-Lago. Now, we have to be precise here.
Okay.
A lot of these are news clipping. Epstein was obsessed with clipping news about himself and his circle, so it's not 38,000 emails between them. But the sheer volume shows you how deeply interconnected their worlds were.
But there's specific allegations in there that go way beyond just news clippings. I keep seeing this story about a limo driver from the 90s.
Yes. There is a formal FBI document in the files. It summarizes a tip received by their Threat Operations Center.
A tip from who?
From a limousine driver. The allegation dates back to 1995. The driver claims to have been transporting Trump and says he overheard him on a phone call discussing, well, discussing abusing a girl.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second. It's a tip
Yeah.
from a driver from 1995. How much weight do we actually put on something like that? I mean, intelligence agencies must get bogus tips all the time.
That's the right question to ask. A raw tip is not a conviction. People say things, people mishear things, people have agendas.
Right.
However, the fact that the FBI logged it, summarized it, and kept it in the file means they found it at least worthy of record. But we have to look at it in context with other documents. For instance, the files also contain a letter from 2019 signed by Epstein himself while he was incarcerated.
This is the letter where he talks about Trump. I've seen mentions of that.
Yes. In this letter, he explicitly mentions Trump's love for young ladies. He phrases it as something they had in common, a shared interest.
And coming from Jeffrey Epstein, love for young ladies isn't a casual observation. It carries a very specific, dark weight.
Precisely. If a regular person says that, it might mean one thing. If a convicted sex trafficker says it about a powerful friend, it's code. It's a signal.
Right.
Now, we absolutely must note that Trump's team has dismissed all these allegations as completely false. His supporters have long argued that he banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago.
Which is true. He did ban him.
He did ban him eventually. But the files show they communicated after that ban. There are flight logs, there are phone messages. The whole "I barely knew him" defense becomes much harder to maintain when you have 38,000 references to you in his personal files.
Okay, so moving to the other side of the aisle, Bill Clinton. We've known for years, obviously, about his association with Epstein, the trips to Africa on the plane, the foundation work. But are there new details here? Is there anything fresh?
The most explosive new claim comes from the emails of Sarah Ransom, one of the survivors.
Okay.
She alleges the existence of video recordings. Specifically, she claims there are tapes involving Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and Richard Branson.
The famous blackmail tapes, the compromat. But Ransom has, well, to be fair, she's changed her story a few times, hasn't she?
She has, and we have to be very careful and empathetic here. She has vacillated on this in the past, sometimes retracting the claim, but she has recently reiterated it. Survivors often recant out of fear, out of trauma, or due to active threats. It's a survival mechanism. But from a purely investigative standpoint, it complicates the evidence. We don't have the tapes. We have the allegation of this.
But there's also the more mundane stuff, right? Like the email about the tepid party.
Yes, and I think this is almost more damning in a way than the sensational rumors.
How so?
It's an email from Epstein's publicist. She's describing a party for a film director, Billionaire, and the email just casually mentions that Bill Clinton and Jeff Bezos were there. It describes the party as tepid, boring.
Why does a boring party matter?
Because it illustrates complete integration. Epstein wasn't crashing these events. He wasn't hiding in a dark room in the corner. He was a fixture. He was standing next to the former president of the United States and the CEO of Amazon at a boring cocktail party. He was part of the furniture of the elite. And that normalization is what allowed the abuse to continue for so long.
Right. And then, of course, we have Prince Andrew. I feel like every time new documents drop, the hole he's in just gets deeper and deeper.
It really does. And what's important to note now is that it's not just Virginia Giuffre anymore. The new files highlight the sworn testimony of another woman, Johanna Schober.
What did she say?
She alleged under oath that Prince Andrew groped her at Epstein's New York mansion. This provides corroboration. It's a second accuser, on the record, placing him in that specific context of...
And what about this dispute over the photo? The famous picture of Andrew with his arm around Virginia. He claimed on national television that it was a fake.
He claimed it was a fake, or that he had no memory of it ever being taken. But the file suggests the FBI never once contested its authenticity. They treated it as a real, valid piece of evidence. The fake photo defense doesn't seem to hold any water within the investigation files themselves. The FBI is pretty good at spotting a Photoshop job they didn't flag.
Let's pivot to the unexpected figures, or maybe not unexpected, but the people who managed to stay out of the direct spotlight for a while. The tech titans. Let's start with Elon Musk.
This is fascinating. There is an email chain where Musk asks Epstein, and this is a direct quote, "What day will be the wildest party on your island?"
He actually asked for the wildest party in writing.
In writing, that is the quote.
Yeah.
And Epstein's reply is just bizarre.
What does he say?
He asks Musk if he is retarded, using that slur in what seems to be a joking manner. He's essentially telling him that the timing was wrong or that he shouldn't be asking that question.
What does that tell you, though?
It shows a level of casual familiarity and banter that completely contradicts the idea that they were just distant business acquaintances. You don't verify if someone is retarded in a professional email unless you are very, very close.
Mm-hmm. And Bill Gates. We've heard about him having meetings, but there's a specific email in these files that looks like, well, it looks like extortion.
It absolutely does. It's commonly referred to as the Shakedown email. Epstein writes to Gates, and the subtext is incredibly heavy. He seemingly threatens to reveal details about an affair or perhaps private medical information to Melinda Gates if Bill cuts ties or doesn't participate in some philanthropic venture Epstein was pushing.
So he was trying to force Gates to stay in the orbit, to keep playing ball.
Exactly. It's a perfect example that Epstein wasn't just a friend to these people. He was collecting leverage. I know this about you, so you will do this for me. That was the dynamic.
Leverage, that's the key word here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we also have Richard Branson mentioned in a 2013 email asking Epstein to bring his harem.
Harem. That is the word he used. It just strips away any pretense that these men didn't know what Epstein's business was.
Right.
If you don't ask your financial advisor to bring his harem to your private island unless you know exactly what dynamic is at play, it confirms that the sexual component wasn't a secret. It was the commodity. It was the entire point.
Before we move on to the intelligence angle, there's one more name that really feels like it bridges the gap between politics and the deep state. Catherine Rimler.
This is a crucial pivot point, a very important name. Catherine Rimler was President Obama's White House counsel, a top government lawyer.
Okay.
The files contain an email where she writes to Epstein about receiving a CIA medal, the agency's highest award for a civilian. And she asks him, how cool is that?
I'm sorry. She's seeking validation from Jeffrey Epstein about CIA award.
Exactly. Why would a top White House lawyer be emailing a registered sex offender, and remember, this is post-2008 conviction, to brag about a CIA medal? It suggests a relationship where Epstein is seen as a peer in that world, the world of intelligence and high-level secrets. She's treating him like a colleague in the intelligence community.
Which leads us perfectly into part 3, the intelligence angle and the why.
Yeah.
Because for a very long time, the Epstein was a spy theory, was dismissed as, tinfoil hat stuff. But these files, they make it very hard to look away.
The honeypot theory. The idea that Epstein was an intelligence asset for Mossad or the CIA or some other agency is gaining significant traction based on these documents. We are not just looking at speculation anymore. We are looking at Epstein's own correspondence and actions.
Let's talk about the FOIA requests. This blew my mind when I read it.
It is remarkable. In 1999 and then again in 2011, Jeffrey Epstein himself filed Freedom of Information Act requests to the Central Intelligence Agency.
What was he asking for?
He was specifically asking for any and all records reflecting an agency affiliation.
Walk me through the logic there. If I'm a secret agent, why am I filing a public records request to the agency for my own file? It doesn't make sense.
It's a probe. It's a power move. He's likely checking to see what kind of paper trail exists on his affiliation, or perhaps he's trying to establish a paper trail for leverage against them. You don't ask the CIA, do I work for you? Unless the answer is very complicated. A normal hedge fund manager has no reason to clarify his employment status with the CIA.
And then we have Alexandra Acosta's famous comment.
Right. The former U.S. attorney who cut that sweetheart deal. He was quoted as telling his colleagues that he was told to back off, that Epstein belonged to intelligence.
He said that.
He said that. And then you have the emails involving Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel. Epstein makes a joke in an email with him regarding whether he works for Mossad, and he says, you or I. The implication being they both might be in that game.
It paints a picture of blackmail operations on an industrial scale. We've all heard the rumors about cameras in every room.
And the files lend credence to that. Cameras in the New York mansion, cameras in the Palm Beach house. The concept is compromise, but the debate has always been, was it direct blackmail, pay me money, or I will release this tape, or was it something more subtle?
More like mutually assured destruction.
Exactly. That's the theory. It's not pay me. It's I have this on you, so you must include me in your deals. You must take my call. You must introduce me to the next powerful person. It's a way of forcing entry into the highest levels of the elite network. If you have compromising information on everyone, you are, in a strange way, safe from everyone.
There's an email from Tom Pritzker, the billionaire, that really illustrates the level of access this group had. It's the Boys with Toys email.
Yes. This one is chilling. Tom Pritzker is emailing Epstein. He says he's in a remote valley in Afghanistan. He talks about being there with General Petraeus and casually borrowing choppers, military helicopters, boys with toys, he calls it.
So they're treating an active war zone like a playground, and Epstein is the guy he's bragging to about it.
It shows that Epstein's circle had access to actual state assets, military hardware, intelligence figures. This wasn't just a guy who ran a hedge fund. This was something else entirely.
And then the files get even darker. We have to touch on the so-called brownstone operations.
We do, and we have to be extremely careful here. The FBI files contain raw reports, and I want to emphasize, these are raw reports, sometimes from confidential human sources, that mention allegations of a much darker, almost ritualistic nature.
We're talking about the scimitar allegations and things like that.
Yes. Interviews where witnesses describe ritualistic elements, scars, strange ceremonies. Now, as an expert, I have to caveat this heavily. Raw FBI reports can contain information from unstable or unreliable sources. Not every tip is a fact.
Sure.
But the fact that these allegations appear repeatedly in the files, painting a picture of something approaching the occult, adds a layer of profound darkness to the rumors surrounding the operation. It suggests that for some of the participants, this was more than just simple abuse. It was performative. It was ritualized power.
Speaking of the psychology behind all this, part 4 is something I've been really dying to discuss with you. The Steve Bannon interview tapes, we have the transcripts, and they are just wild.
Wild is an understatement. These transcripts, found deep in the files, document an unaired interview or maybe just a long discussion between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein, and they give us a look directly into Epstein's mind that we have never had before.
There's this incredible moment where Bannon asks him point blank if he is the devil.
Yes. Bannon asks, "Do you think you're the devil himself?" And Epstein's reply is just chilling in its calmness. He says, "No, but I do have a good mirror."
I have a good mirror. What does that even mean?
It implies a supreme, almost psychopathic level of self-awareness. He knows what he is. He knows how he's perceived by the world. He is in denial about it. He's looking in the mirror, and he is completely comfortable with what he sees. Most criminals try to rationalize their behavior. I'm misunderstood. I'm the real victim.
Yeah.
Epstein seems to have just accepted his own nature.
And his philosophy on everything else is just as strange. He talks about finance and science in this very dismissive way.
He does. He compares the 2008 financial crash to a heart attack. Just a random system failure that no one could possibly predict. He dismisses all the experts, but then he goes on these bizarre rants about how science is a failure. He uses the example of a banana.
The banana rant. This sounded like absolute pseudo-intellectual nonsense to me when I read it.
Because it is. He argues that science can explain why a banana ripens faster when it's next to another fruit, which, by the way, is high school chemistry. It's ethylene gas. We've known this for a century.
Right.
But he uses this false premise to claim that science can't explain the soul. It paints him not as the genius he claimed to be, but as a manipulator using pseudo-intellectualism as a tool. He's dazzling people with these deep thoughts that are actually quite shallow, but they're delivered with total, unblinking confidence.
It sounds like a cult leader.
Precisely, a cult of one. And this connects directly to his funding of places like the Santa Fe Institute. The files show his obsession with transhumanist ideas, with eugenics, with this idea of seeding the human race with his DNA.
Pause there for a second. Transhumanism. For you, the listener who maybe hasn't gone down that particular rabbit hole, what are we actually talking about here?
Broadly, it's the belief in using science and technology to fundamentally improve the human condition living forever, genetic editing, that sort of thing.
But Epstein's version was different.
Epstein's version was just old-fashioned eugenics with the sci-fi gloss. He truly believed he was a superior being and that he had a moral obligation to impregnate as many women as possible to improve the human gene pool. It wasn't just about lust. It was a messianic complex.
Unbelievable.
This was a former math teacher who lied about his degrees, yet he was lecturing Nobel laureates on the nature of reality. It shows you how easily the so-called elite could be charmed by someone who just acted like they knew all the secrets of the universe.
Part 5 brings us crashing back down to the reality of the victims and the legal system, the machinery of impunity. Because none of this happens without the justice system failing and failing repeatedly.
The 2008 sweetheart deal remains the absolute smoking gun of institutional failure. We've known for years it granted immunity not just to Epstein, but to any alleged co-conspirators, known or unknown.
A truly insane clause.
It is. But the new insight from these documents is the internal reaction at the Department of Justice.
They knew it was bad. They had to know.
They knew. The files contain emails and memos from DOJ officials admitting internally that the deal was bad, calling it a betrayal. They knew they were violating the Crime Victims' Rights Act by not informing the victims. They knew it was legally indefensible.
But they did anyway.
And then they circled the wagons. The priority immediately became protecting the department from lawsuits, not protecting the girls from Jeffrey Epstein.
And this failure, it goes back even further. We have to talk about Maria Farmer. She was the first whistleblower way, way back in 1996.
Maria Farmer's story is just heartbreaking. She reported Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell to the FBI decades ago. She told them everything, the abuse, the recruiting, the setup, and she was completely ignored. The files confirmed that the system had all the information it needed to stop him in the 90s, and they did nothing.
And it wasn't just law enforcement. It was the media, too. The story of Vanity Fair and Graydon Carter is in these files.
Yes. Vicky Ward's 2002 profile of Epstein. She had the goods. She had spoken to the Farmer sisters. She had the allegations. But the files detail how Epstein showed up at the magazine's office in New York.
And what happened?
He threatened. He threatened witch doctor curses, again, that weird pseudo-mysticism he used to intimidate people. But more importantly, he threatened legal and financial ruin. And the most damning allegations were scrubbed from the final article.
It's a perfect example of how power and money can silence truth. And at the absolute center of this web, connecting the money to the victims, was Ghislaine Maxwell.
She was the indispensable connector. The files absolutely reinforce this. Epstein was new money. He was crass. He was mysterious. Maxwell was old world credibility. She brought the royalty, the high society legitimacy.
She opened the doors.
She opened all the doors. And the files detailed the pyramid scheme of abuse she ran, turning victims into recruiters of other victims. It was a vicious, self-sustaining engine of predation.
So here we are in 2026, Part 6, Broader Implications. What does all of this mean for us now? There's a very sensitive, but I think very revealing email regarding the term Goem.
This is a difficult topic, but it's in the files, and we have to address it neutrally. There is an email exchange where Epstein and others discuss how the Jew makes money versus the Goem, which is a sometimes derogatory Yiddish term for non-Jews.
It sounds incredibly tribal.
It is, but in the context of these files, it reads more like elite tribalism than religious tribalism. It's not just about one background. It's a belief that we, the global elite, are a different species than them, the regular people. The laws that apply to the Goem, the common people, they just don't apply to the people in the room with General Petraeus or on the private jet. It's a fundamental us versus them mentality among the ultra-wealthy.
And legally, it seems they were right. Because despite 3.5 million pages of documents, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche has indicated it is unlikely anyone else will be prosecuted.
That is the incredibly frustrating reality. The potential witness defense is very, very strong.
What does that mean exactly?
It means many of these powerful men are listed in the files as witnesses or potential witnesses rather than as perpetrators or co-conspirators. So without near physical evidence, like the tapes Sarah Lansam claims exist, it is very difficult to build a criminal case solely on flight logs or social emails decades later.
Which brings us to the limited hangout theory. It's a cynical view, but it feels plausible.
It's the cynical but perhaps most realistic interpretation of what's happening right now. Is this release a limited hangout?
Explain that term for our listeners.
In intelligence terms, a limited hangout is what you do when you get caught. You can't deny everything, so you voluntarily release some of the truth. You release a flood of messy, embarrassing, but ultimately non-fatal information to satisfy the public's appetite for blood.
And let them see the smoke so you can keep the fire hidden.
That's it, exactly. You release the flight logs to hide the videos. You release the social emails to hide the hard drives with the blackmail material.
So we are only seeing what they're comfortable with us seeing.
We're seeing the clumsy, messy exterior, but the core, the real blackmail, the potential treason, the state-level intelligence operations, that is likely in the 3 million pages we still aren't allowed to see.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, where does that leave us? Where do we go from here?
We have looked into the abyss. We have seen a deep state, not as a conspiracy theory, but as a literal reality, a convergence of intelligence agencies, billionaires and predators, operating in a gray zone completely outside the law.
The takeaway for me is that the Epstein Files are not really about Jeffrey Epstein anymore. They are an indictment of the entire system that created him and protected him.
That's the heart of it. If Epstein was just a money launderer or just a common pervert, the system would have crushed him decades ago. The fact that he thrived for so long suggests he served a function. He was useful.
Useful to the very people now claiming to be shocked and horrified.
Precisely. And here's the provocative thought I think we should leave. If the blackmail wasn't just for him, if he was an asset, a collector of secrets for a state or an intelligence agency, where are those files now? We have the emails, we have the flight logs, but the videos, the hard drives, the actual compromise, who is holding that leverage right now?
And who today is making decisions on the world stage because they know that that leverage exists and is pointed at them? That is the question we should all be asking.
Indeed. Look beyond the headlines. Question the timing of what's revealed and what remains hidden. And remember, transparency is rarely given freely. It has to be forced.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Keep asking questions.
Stay curious.